This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to the link in the description below so they know that I sent you. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it is Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of the History of the Banned and Restricted list. Here, in part 6, I'm going to cover the entirety of 1997. This year was actually fairly quiet for the formats that existed before 1997, Standard, Legacy, and Vintage, but two new formats would emerge in 1997, and we have to talk about some announcements that had major effects on those new formats. One of the big developments in 1997 was the creation of Block Constructed. Starting with Ice Age, Homelands, and Alliances, Wizards began releasing 3 consecutive sets that had the same settings and mechanical themes. They called these 3 sets together a block. In this constructed format, only cards from those 3 sets were legal. The idea of blocks isn't around today, and the last time there was a block constructed premiere event was in 2014, but that does show you that the idea of block constructed lasted for a pretty long time. Once these block formats were created, they sometimes had to have their own unique banned and restricted lists because some of the cards proved to be too powerful for a format with so few cards in it. After the Ice Age Block Constructed Pro Tour in 1997, 2 cards were banned in the format. They were Thawing Glaciers and ZURAN. We've talked about the orb before, which was restricted in Standard and Vintage in 1995. To put it briefly, for those formats, it was too easy to abuse with symmetrical land destruction effects, especially with balance, and it also worked far too well with one of the most powerful cards in the entire format, Necropotence, which let you pay life to draw cards. In Ice Age Block, it was also abusable, with the other card that got banned with this announcement, Thawing Glaciers. These 2 cards were banned because using them together was deemed as too powerful for control decks in the format. You could just keep searching up lands and sacrificing them while thinning out your deck and improving your draws in the long run. This made it difficult for aggressive decks to find a way to win, and generally, as we've seen, Wizards likes for all deck types to be viable in most formats. In addition to being banned in Ice Age Block, ZURAN also got moved from restricted to banned in Standard in June of 1997 because Necropotence decks were just too good. The next block constructed format was Mirage Block, which consisted of cards from Mirage, Visions, and Weatherlight. In this format, Squandered Resources ended up getting banned. This format gave birth to the game's very first combo deck since the restriction of Channel back in 1994, which could of course be used together with Fireball for a very quick win. This combo is a little more complicated in that it uses Cadaverous Bloom along with Squandered Resources and draw spells like Prosperity to generate an insane amount of mana to just kill the opponent with Drain Life. This combo was surprisingly consistent in Block Constructed, where there were no good ways to disrupt it. This deck was dominant at the Mirage Block Constructed Pro Tour with 3 top 8s, and as a result, Wizards banned Squandered Resources from the format, so this combo would no longer be so consistent. So in addition to block constructed formats being born in 1997, Extended would be born too in July of 1997. Extended only included cards from the 2 full blocks that now existed, as well as the most recent core set. Over time, Extended would come to include cards from the 4 most recent blocks and core sets, but at this point, there weren't that many blocks to include. The Extended format started with a banned list made up largely of cards that we've already discussed at length in other parts of this series, like the Anti-Cards, Demonic Tutor, Balance, Fast Bond, Regrowth, Black Vice, Ivory Tower, Soul Ring, Channel, Maze of Ith, Wheel of Fortune, Mind Twist, and ZURAN. However, there were 4 cards that were exclusive to the ban list for Extended, and they were Mana Crypt, SERENDIB, EFREET, Juggernaut, and KIRD, and we're going to spend the rest of this video talking about why these cards are banned in Extended. Let's start by looking at Mana Crypt. It was an extremely contentious card for a couple reasons. The most obvious is that it is incredibly powerful and a source of fast mana. Today we know it's one of the best mana rocks in the entire game. In other formats, Wizards had restricted or banned any cards that might cause players to have far too quick of starts, so it made sense that Mana Crypt was banned and Extended. It had a downside to be sure, but not enough of one for this new Extended format. Weird thing is, it would remain legal in Vintage as a 4 of until 1999 when it got restricted. It was also banned in Legacy later that year. So the power level of this card is really high, and that's one thing. But another thing that people didn't like about Mana Crypt, well, it was not available in booster packs and only available if you picked up a magic novel called Final Sacrifice. You could then fill out your information on a special insert in the book, mail it out, and get a Mana Crypt. People didn't like that the card wasn't available in packs, and part of the reason it got banned and Extended may have been related to that fact too. At any rate, Mana Crypt is a strong card, and it makes sense that they didn't want it in the new format. It has gone on to see a ton of play in Vintage as a one-of, really showcasing that it is really powerful. The other 3 cards that got restricted all have one thing in common. They were, for the time, very powerful and highly efficient creatures. These restrictions were made to keep aggro decks from being too powerful, so let's take a look at the first of these, SERENDIB EFREET. The EFREET was a very powerful creature for its time, and honestly, it would still be pretty powerful, at least in limited, these days. 3 mana for a 3/4 flyer was some serious business, and it only doing 1 damage to you a turn wasn't enough of a downside. It also didn't die to Lightning Bolt, which was already a pretty important removal spell at this point. Back in 1994, at the very first Worlds tournament, the EFREET helped 2 aggro decks make it into the top 4, so this concern about how good the card was at least based in part on results that the card had had in the past. The EFREET would remain banned and extended the entire time it would have been legal there. In other words, it rotated out before ever getting a chance to be played in the format. Another aggressive creature to be banned and extended was KIRD. Considered by many the best 1-mana creature in the game at this point, because it was essentially a 1-mana 2/3 if you had played your Taiga on turn 1, this was an incredibly strong play for red-green aggro decks, and they didn't want those decks to have such a powerful early game, so KIRD gets banned. Like SERENDIB EFREET, KIRD had been a key card in the game's early aggro decks, appearing in 3 of the top 8 decks at Worlds in 1994. KIRD also rotated out before ever being unbanned, but it would be reprinted years later in 8th edition and would gain extended legality again the second time around. Even all those years later, KIRD proved to still be good enough to see play in the extended format, and he may have actually been even better because you had access to fetch lands and dual lands, so it's hard to say they made the wrong decision with this banning because KIRD is in fact a very strong creature. Juggernaut was the last aggressive card to be banned when Extended was officially sanctioned, and it is one that makes considerably less sense than either the EFREET or the Ape. While it put up 1 top 8 at Worlds in 1994, something that the other 2 aggro creatures in this announcement did too, it was clearly not as good of a card as the other 2. For one thing, it was a 4-drop with only 3 toughness that was vulnerable to Lightning Bolt. For another, it always had to attack. Sure, it had 5 power for 4 mana, which was a lot back then, but Juggernaut is not nearly as imposing as the other 2 cards on this list, and in the end, Wizards realized that too. Unlike the Ape and EFREET, Juggernaut would be unbanned and extended only 3 months later, in October. This unbanning was made just before the very first extended Pro Tour was held, and the same announcement would add 1 more creature to the ban list for extended, and it was yet another card that was only banned in this format, and it was HYPNOTIC SPECTER. Obviously the most well-known creature of those that were exclusive to the ban list for extended, the Spectre was powerful because it could not only pressure the opponent's life in the air, it could also go after their hand. The Spectre was even better in a world where you could play Dark Ritual, since it allowed you to play the Spectre on turn 1. And while you might be 2 for 1ing yourself to do it, you usually ended up ahead anyway, since if your opponent is hit even once with it, you're breaking even. HYPNOTIC SPECTER had been around since Alpha, but it didn't really start making noise until 1996, alongside Necropotence. HYPNOTIC SPECTER helped make mono black decks so dominant that year, leading to the Black Summer we talked about in Part 5. That year it put up 7 Pro Tour top 8s across 3 events, and it seems that, after they had time to think about it, Wizards decided the Spectre would be too good for Extended 2, and banned it ahead of that first Extended Pro Tour. This is another creature that would stay banned and extended for as long as it would be legal, but it would also be reprinted several years later. Unlike KIRD, though, it never saw play in the extended format after that reprint, though it did find some new success in Standard. Well, that does it for 1997. It was a year where new formats were created, and Wizards, for the most part, did a pretty good job of avoiding completely broken things happening in those formats as a result of those announcements. In our next episode, we're going to look at 1998, which was actually the year I started playing the game. Urza Saga was released at the end of that year, and there would be several cards from that set that would need to be banned or restricted, and that's largely what we'll talk about next time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of the History of the Banned and Restricted list, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the series, you should see the playlist for it on your screen now. Thanks for watching.